Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, weiss-sound.com and Weiss Advice here on YouTube. In this video, I'm going to be mixing some horns. My production partner Joe sent me this dub record. It's really phenomenally produced. He hired out some session players online to do some horn parts. He got to the horn parts and said, I'm shaking my head on it. I don't know what to do. You know, let me send it on over and have fun with it, get creative. I said, no problem. So I want to walk you through my thought process as well as what I did in order to get these horn sounds. So I'm going to start by playing what Joe did here, just with the little sum down. It's basically just the raw recording. And now I'm going to play what I came up with. And I wouldn't say this is completely done. I feel like I want to do a little bit more treatment over the horns just to get them like perfect. But let's go through the process here and figure out what's going on. All right, I'm going to take off all of my effects and we're going to go through them one by one. First of all, let's just listen to the raw recording here. So in my mind, this is just a very straightforward, I don't know what the purpose of this is, but here's just a good recording of horns, right? Nothing crazy going on. Sounds like condenser microphone maybe about 2 feet away. Typically, when I'm recording horns, I usually like to go something that's a little bit vibier, so I'll pick something like RE20 or Coles 4038 for trombone, trumpet, but I mean, honestly, just having a nice blank canvas works well and makes sense for a session player, so, you know, I'm happy with it so far. Let's start building a sound, though. So, first of all, we want some kind of pan spread here, right? If I play this with the record, everything's just living dead center, right? Which is not that exciting. So I'm going to make sure that they're panned out. The one thing that I want to note here, though, is that the panning is not 100-100. It's closer to 50-50. And the reason is because once I started getting out to the 100-100 kind of position, it almost felt like disconnected from the record, just because everything is very mono-center. And so having it spread that wide felt a little bit strange. If I had like guitars or keys in there, then maybe it would fill out the sides a little bit better, but I don't. So I did watch my panning and didn't go quite to the extremes. And then I'm listening to it and I'm sort of thinking like, okay, it's 2 trumpets, 2 trombones, and they're sort of in the same mid-range. If I was arranging this, I would probably want something higher to kind of fill out the sound and brighten things up a little bit and give it that pop. But because I didn't have that, I decided to fake it. So the first thing that I'm doing here is I'm using a pitch shifter. Now, I'm using the stock Digi Pitch 2. And the reason I'm using that is twofold. First, it's a little bit grainy, and I kind of like the grain because the style just asks for crust and dirt. Like, you can hear it all over the drums. So I want the horns to also have crust and dirt. And in general, I just like this because the grain always feels good to me. And then the other thing that I like about it is that it's got a mix slider like right there, and so I can use this as an insert. So if I want to process all of the trumpets at the same time, all the trombones at the same time as one ensemble, I can just throw this on and do a wet to dry. So this is 30% of an octave up on everything, and then that's going to be followed by a trim to help level match so that it sounds like it's the same overall. So here's before. After. So it gives it a lot more spark. It gives it a sense of like a slightly fuller ensemble, because all of those imperfections, like if I had really been taking my time with it, I could have also like worked in these little delays here. So maybe done like a 20 millisecond on one side, maybe done like a 13 millisecond on the other. Actually might reprint it with that on because that sounds pretty darn good. And then from there, this is where a lot of the sound is coming from. It's this retro color, which is like, it's basically a whole bunch of distortion modules packed into one. So I've got noise. I'm putting in like a tape hiss kind of a sound into the trumpet, trombone, you know what I'm saying, to give it a little bit of texture and grab the ear. Then I'm giving it a little bit of wobble, which is wow, tape wow, which is basically pitch modulation that's very subtle. Some distortion, some more distortion, as well as this filtered and then reprocessed EQ curve where I'm low passing and high passing the horns, and then I'm restoring the high end with a high shelf. So there's a big change in sound that's happening here. So let's before and after that real quick. So it sits that higher octave back into the record and makes it not stick out and sound quite as fake. It kind of glues everything back in together. It gives it this sort of dusty quality. It makes it feel a little lo-fi, but it also rounds the sound out overall. So there's a lot of things that it's doing that I think are really, really nice. And then lastly, and this is probably the most important thing, all this stuff is more like character decisions. They would absolutely change based on whatever record I'm working with. But this one here, I'm going to need some kind of ambience. I need some space around the horns. I tend to record horns farther back. One of the reasons I like Cole's 4038 is because it's very directional ribbon microphone, and so I can get like 3 to maybe even 4 feet back from the bell of the horn when I'm recording it, and it gives me a lot of air and a lot of space, and even if I don't have some kind of supplementary reverb, it still has more of that room in there, because horns just need room. So here I'm grabbing my spring reverb, my outboard spring reverb, and again, I'm doing this as an insert, not as a send, because I like the tone of the amps on my spring reverb. It does something to the upper mids, like 1.5K-ish, that it's a really nice color, and I want that in there. So I'm using wet to dry, and then again doing some makeup gain on the back end, just so we can get an idea of what it sounds like even, you know? And you might be thinking to yourself at this point, that doesn't sound very springy. Well, it's because it's a very high-end spring reverb. It's a Mic Master Room XL305. Yeah, that's what the thing is called. The label is obscured from my vision at the moment, but it's a very, very smooth spring reverb. A lot of times for reggae and dub kind of stuff, you want a cheaper spring. You want like an Orban or a Tapco or something like that. Those are the springs that sound like really rubbery, where you hear like very distinct, discrete echoes. This one is a lot smoother. It sounds almost more like a chamber kind of reverb, but it works really well on these horns, so I'm rolling with it. Anyway, then I have printed the result, and we get this. And then the last bit is the delays. Delays in reggae and dub music are like part of the genre. It's an instrument in and of itself, so definitely needs delays. The other thing is there's no vocal in this record, so the horns basically are the vocal of the record. So I want to make sure that I'm treating it with the sense of it being the lead line. So I'm going to jump in here, and basically the first thing I've got going here is repeater using the space delay. I love the sound of this, especially for reggae stuff, and this is just a quarter note that kind of rides underneath everything. But it's really subtle. It's just there providing a little bit of ambience and bounce and groove and color. The next thing that I have is a throw, kind of like a line ender where you hear like the repeat of a vocal sometimes. So every time this line leaves a little space, you're going to hear sort of a response line from the delay. And all that is the exact same settings on a separate track, except for this time it's a half note with a lot less feedback. So it's just coupling in on the quarter note that's already there and making it sound like a response. And the very, very last thing that I have going on here is what I call a splash. This can work with a reverb or a delay. In this particular case, I'm using an eighth note delay. And it's the ender to the overall part of the song. So right there, I'm going to throw in this eighth note. And after that, I have the splash effect, which is basically just heavy compression. You can really like dig into this with like the all buttons in for an 1176, but in this particular case, I'm just using the 4-to-1 because it sounded pretty good that way. All it is just very heavy compression. Basically, when you have a delay, most delays have a somewhat linear decay. Each level of feedback kind of cuts by the same increment. This changes that by putting a compression curve on it, and you get an arced delay. So it's less of a decay in the beginning, and then it accelerates in decay as it goes down. So it ends up changing the overall feel of things. It's not quite the same as just like turning up the feedback. So I'll before and after that real quick. And you hear that there's like a little bit more intensity to it. There's a little different color to it. It's just a nice little vibe. And then I'm adding a little bit of saturation to break things up and make it sound a little crustier on the back end. Nice little fuzzy thing. And then here it is in context. It kind of matches that little spring throw that's happening in the background as well. So that's my thought process there. Now, the very last thing I'm going to need to address is going to be the EQ curve of the horns. Right now, there's a lot of 1K. I kind of like it that way because it's punchy. It's more like 800 hertz. If I take that down and I sort of turn everything up, it kind of smooths things out, but at the same time, it loses a little attitude. So I'm sort of negotiating between those ideas. So you can hear that I make the horns a lot bigger sounding. Well, not a lot bigger, but a little bigger sounding, but I do kind of smooth out some of the punchy parts. So I'm going to negotiate with this EQ and try and just finagle it right into that perfect sweet spot. But that's basically going to be the end of it. Different arrangements are going to take different things, but I just wanted to walk you through this thought process and what I was doing, just so you could get a sense of how I was taking a pretty bland sounding horn, not a bad sounding horn, but bland sounding horn, and turning it into something that's more interesting and fits the record a little better. Alright guys, if you dig this video, hit that like button if you like what I'm doing here on this channel. Hit subscribe with the notification bell so you get notified. If there's any questions you have about this process, then let me know in the comments section below. And of course, we are musicians, sound is our instrument. I will catch you next time.